The San Gabriel Valley, just east of Los Angeles, is enormous. No, really, it's huge. It's about 200 square miles and incorporates dozens of cities and neighborhoods in a combined population of about 2 million people. It's also essentially North America's biggest and best Chinatown. Nearly every kind of regional cuisine, from northern-style dumplings to Shanghainese seafood, braised meat from Hunan province, and spicy Sichuanese hot pot, can all be found in the SGV. And the food is good. Outside of China itself, it's probably the best. Intense competition ensures that only the best of the best make it. The minute a place closes, a new one is primed to take its place. I sat down with David Chan, a food enthusiast and amateur historian who knows a ton about the history of Chinese and Chinese Americans in the LA area, as well as about Chinese restaurants. He's eaten at over 7,500 different Chinese restaurants. If you're good at mental math, that's a different restaurant a day for over 20 years. We met at one of my favorite dumpling places in San Gabriel called Hui Tou Xiang, which specializes in long, rectangular-shaped, pork-filled, pan-fried dumplings.
Most dumplings look like dumplings. A few places do it this way. This is one of the few that prepare it in that manner.
Yeah, they look like little train cars.
Yeah.
They're very cute.
Yeah.
And did you grow up in LA?
Yeah, my parents were born in Los Angeles.
Okay, so you were born and raised.
Yeah.
My mom grew up in Culver City, and they couldn't buy a house. They were looking for West LA, Santa Monica, and they had to buy a house privately because it was policy not to sell to Chinese people.
I remember I was actually in high school in the Crenshaw area where we looked at the house, and then the broker took my dad aside and he said, "Don't bother making an offer on this house because the neighbors on this block have made a pact among themselves not to sell to any non-whites." Not very many people are aware of the fact that the reason why there's this gigantic Chinese and Asian American community in the San Gabriel Valley is directly related to the history of housing discrimination in the city of Los Angeles. Los Angeles grew very rapidly. I mean, it grew from 100,000 people in 1900 up to like 1.3 million in 1930. So you could see where there was just massive development of new residential neighborhoods in LA. The dark side of this is that all this new development was restricted to white occupants through use of deed restrictions. So which means if you were Chinese, you'd probably be living either in South LA or East LA. And then what happened was that in the late 50s in Monterey Park, there were some new housing developments that came online. And on the Los Angeles side, there was this heavily Japanese neighborhood. The Japanese asked the developers, "Hey, can we move here?" And the developers said yes. So that was the start of the Asian influx into the San Gabriel Valley.
So that was the beginning?
That was the beginning. And then a couple of years later, the same thing, that you saw an exodus of Chinese from El Sereno and from the Crenshaw area too, where they would buy houses in the Monterey Highlands.
I know there was a man named Frederick
Shea. Yeah, so Frederick Shea, he found an area of hillside homes, newly built, a growing Chinese American community. And so he decided that he would market Monterey Park to Chinese in Taiwan and in Hong Kong as the Chinese Beverly Hills. And even though the local community was skeptical that something like this would happen, it did. And that really basically, the rest is history.
Monterey Park, where Frederick Shea began developing his Chinese Beverly Hills in the 1970s, has many Taiwanese restaurants from that era that are still going strong. I met up with a few colleagues at one of them, Huge Tree Pastry on Atlantic Boulevard. Genevieve Ko, the LA Times cooking editor, and Danny Chau, former associate editor of The Ringer, were both born in Monterey Park, in the same hospital, actually. Columnist Frank Shyong used to cover the San Gabriel Valley for the LA Times. We sat down to a huge spread of food, including some classic Taiwanese breakfast foods. Youtiao, which is like a long, cruller-like Chinese donut, and fantuan, which can best be described as like a Chinese burrito. We eventually started talking about the concept of authenticity in food that came to the US from other countries, whether that concept is valuable and whether it even exists.
It's obviously something that needs to be talked about because it's so pervasive in just food discourse, but I just don't use it because it's a word that kind of tries to take things as like fluid as like tradition and experience and everything, and it kind of jams it into this like binary of this is either authentic or it's not.
I think the problem comes when authenticity is used with universality in mind. Like the way my mom grows up eating this certain Taiwanese dish, baoan, right? It's in tubes with like a different color sauce, and so she might come to here and where the baoan is served differently and think, this is inauthentic, but it's actually just not authentic to her experience. And so, I don't know, I think like many of the problems of the word are the way people use it.
I kind of feel like we're all basically just 8 years old, like still, and we're all just sort of trying to recapture that sense and that like feeling and whatever that happened to taste like. And that if it doesn't match, it's like not.
Yeah.
Right, because I was growing up, there weren't as many ingredients available then as there are now. So like we had a version of like chilled noodles that we made with like Skippy peanut butter, because that was what you could get. Like you have to allow for change. So in terms of the desire to keep things the same, only if it tasted good. If things tasted better with the introduction of Western techniques or ingredients, and chefs here did that, like
Your parents would
more
be
power
open
to them.
Like people asking us to live up to this really rigid definition of what Chinese is.
But it's just how you do things. You do things one way, you do things another way. Like dananmin or dandanmian. There are gazillion versions, and that's okay. And there are gazillion versions of Italian tomato sauce, and that's okay too. But
You're trying to be true to an experience, true to a memory, true to your mom and your grandma and whoever else. It's like, and that's so different across the board.
yeah.
We're all 8 years old.
Right now, when I eat food made by other cultures, I don't think about authenticity as like a question to answer or whatever. It's more like a story you have to learn.
Right.
It's like why is the food this way?
Right.
And I feel like that's so much better. Because it's so much more interesting. You can actually learn, why people make fan tuan this way in Taiwan, and there's usually an interesting answer. San Gabriel Valley, I always look at this place as kind of like a preview of what America is going to be like.
Right, yeah.
Because it's mainly Asian and Latino, and so we have these two groups that are the fastest growing groups in America that are, living in large quantities next to each other, intermarrying, creating this sort of hybrid SGV culture that, I think the future of American culture is the hybridization of all these different
for
types
sure,
of cultures.
for sure,
People
yeah.
living next to each other, making interesting stuff.
If the future of the food is hybridization, that future might look a lot like Cato. Chef John Yao's restaurant, which was just named #1 on the LA Times 101 Best Restaurants list, sits in a strip mall next to Mexican and Salvadoran restaurants in West LA. He's an SGV native from Walnut, a small city on the valley's eastern edge. And even though he's only 28 years old, he's already got a Michelin star. Yao's passion is fine dining, and he's eager to reframe the conversation around it. With Cato, he's trying to push the boundaries of traditional Taiwanese cooking in ways that haven't been done before.
What are some ways in which LA culture, being in this city, has informed your food and how you cook?
I think all cuisines have strong points and weak points. Like sometimes we'll need a component that's a little lacking. We'll try to fill it in with something else, like a chili element. We have a roasted chili jam that's very similar to like a namprick noom. So that's like just something you have in LA a lot.
Sure.
So we'll fill in the blank with that. We used to have a dish where, like, if you mix it all together, it would taste like a ceviche or aguachile.
As someone who works in fine dining, what have been some of the challenges for you as far as like putting your cuisine forward and like getting people to eat it?
It's a hard question because Taiwanese has no history of like fine dining. Like, how do we turn the most famous Taiwanese dishes into something that feels luxurious, even though it's rooted in like street food? And how do we get the American palate used to what Chinese and Taiwanese people perceive as luxurious? Like we always try to serve sea cucumber, abalone, and matsutake because Americans don't necessarily think of that as like a luxury product. They're thinking like caviar, truffles, but how do we get them used to things like a chewy texture that we like? So I think it's just an education process and like how well you execute something. Have that come across as like something that you're willing to pay like X amount of money for.
Sure.
So that's something we struggle with, I think.
What would you like to see happen as far as where the food goes?
I mean, for me personally, like the reason I want to get 3 Michelin stars doing like Taiwanese food is because of that reason. It's like a platform and a podium to like share like these flavors and culture. Like everyone eats like gochujang now. Like what if everyone knew what sea cucumber was? I think that'd be great. It's just you're preserving a culture by like pushing it, I guess. Maybe one day the Chinese accent will be as sexy as like having an Italian accent. So
Yeah, dude.
that'd be great.